I mean, I went down to the Jack, and I had never been there before, and I don't compete. I haven't competed since 2018, but I got invited from a friend of mine who was going down there with the barbecue bus, and it was very cool to be down there. I saw a lot of people I don't see very often. The experience was cool, but as a whole, I understand what you're saying, where there's less and less about competition. And when we think about like posting content and stuff like that, we're not trying to appeal. We do some competition stuff, but it's mostly for the backyard person or people in restaurant industry and stuff like that.
I never wanted to have shitty audio as a host, number one. But then I also decided that I was going to also demand my level of audio from my guests. Because why have me sound great when it's very easy for you to sound great as well? And you can do it very inexpensively. A lot of bad things happen in the pandemic, but the one thing it taught us is everybody can sound almost broadcast studio quality for very little money. USB microphone into the computer, do a couple microphone tricks, you sound like $1 million. And there's no reason that anybody that's hosting any kind of show or their guests, like you said, most of the shows are not live. Like, I understand that it's a bit of a hurdle for me to ask my guests to do that, but I send them gear in advance. Like, my show's booked up mostly, a month and a half to 2 months out, depending on what time of year it is. And I will say, if you don't want to buy one, I will send you one, but you're not getting on the show otherwise.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Duce Raymond Podcast. I'm here with a very good friend, Mr. Greg Rempe. Greg, how you doing today?
Great, Duce. Thanks for having me. Very excited.
We're here after hours. Usually I film during the day, and it's 7:30 at night, past my bedtime almost.
Some of us have a day job. I'm widely unavailable during normal business hours, unfortunately.
Yes. Well, you made that perfectly clear in the email. But you know what? For you, Greg, we're going to move stuff around to make this happen.
Hey, as long as I can be as aggravating as possible, it seems like we're hitting the right notes as we lead off.
So, Greg, for those of you who don't know, is probably probably the longest running barbecue podcast there is in history ever in the world. Greg, tell us a little bit about your podcast and how you got started with it.
So it started all the way back in what would be 2004. Not podcasting, but I had gotten a Weber Smoky Mountain for my Father's Day gift that my wife bought me. Had no idea how to use it, read the directions that came with it. That was a nightmare, of course. And then right before I threw it out, somebody said, there's this website called Virtual Weber Bullet, specifically dedicated to Weber Smoky Mountain. It was a message board. So I went on the message board, quickly realized I was cooking on it the wrong way. And I had made like this supremely underwhelming rack of spare ribs. And I was like, I can't believe I wasted this much time for this result. What a travesty. But the Virtual Weber Bullet saved me. And I met a whole bunch of great people through that online entity, and decided I could also make my own forum at the time. So that's what I did. I started a barbecue forum. That's when they were really starting to become, like, that was hot technology. Back then you could go online, you could post a question, and then maybe in a day or two you could come back and see a whole bunch of different answers. Or if it was really popular, you don't have to wait 15, 20 minutes and you're getting a whole bunch of answers. And it grew into one of the bigger barbecue forums across the internet. And around 2000,
was that like at the same time as like Barbecue Brethren was getting hot and stuff like that?
Well, yeah. So like in my heyday, it was Barbecue Brethren. It was Barbecue Forum that was founded by Ray Basso.
Yes.
There were a number of other forums. It's like anything, right? Once it gets popular, everybody wants to dip their foot in the pool and see what it's all about.
I remember Uncle Dave getting all hot and bothered on those things. He was getting an argument.
You could react in real time to people over whatever you were disagreeing with. Otherwise, you're reading it in the paper or If
Yeah.
you're a KCBS member, you're reading it in the bullshit and you're swearing at your wife or whoever about how this guy's stupid that's writing this article. Well, now you had an outlet where you could really start engaging with people and give real-time feedback. So it was really
Yeah.
revolutionary at the time. And in 2006, there was a huge influx of forums. So to try and separate, I had just started hearing about this thing called podcasting. The guy that did the barbecue forum started podcasting. It was horrible. And I was like, well, I could try it, and there's no way I'm going to be as bad as Ray Basso is at this. So at least I won't be the worst. And so I started. It really just covered the members of the forum. It was horrible. I mean, the first 12 shows of my podcasting career aren't even available on the internet. I have them in a safe in my house because they're terrible. But we learn as we go, of course.
Sure.
So that was separator number one. And then 2008, I took the show to a live format because, of course, between 6 and 8, there was an influx of barbecue podcasts. So to re-separate, I went to the live show, found a guy through Craigslist that was starting an internet radio station out in LA who was looking for talent to take up about an hour or so during a portion of the afternoon or evening. And I got a hold of him. He's like, you can talk about barbecue once a week for an hour? And I said, yeah, I've been doing it for 2 years. And he said, well, I don't know how we're going to make this happen because everybody else is going to be coming to the studio in LA. And I said, we'll figure it out. And we sure did. And he would connect to me, and then the sound would go out over his servers in Los Angeles. Cool. And that's the way the live show started. Eventually grew into a second hour. And 2024, here we are.
Was it always the BBQ Central Show? Did you start with that name?
No, it was originally, everything was called, I don't know if I'm going to get sued for this or not, but BBQ the number 4 dash the letter U.com was the website. And the forum originally was called Barbecue for You.
That's why your email is that. Okay, now it makes sense.
And then the show originally was the Barbecue for You podcast. And then one night, right around New Year's, I got a call from a guy who said, I have the trademark on BBQ-4-U. Only that. And I said, so what? And he said, you're not allowed to use that anymore, or I'll sue you. And I said, go ahead and sue me. I have no money. Go ahead. Knock yourself out. And so I consulted a lawyer that was also a member of my forum, and he said, hey, I did a little research on this guy. It looks like he does it every couple of years. And if you ever thought about maybe doing a name change, this is probably as good a time as I need to do it. And consulted a few folks and realized BBQ Central would probably be better, and away we went. Subsequently have gotten all the right legal stuff to keep me protected from some douchebag deciding to do that to me again down the road. So no worries on that. And that's how we've been ever since.
Awesome. I think that's so cool that you kind of got pushed into the live scene, and there's not very many live shows right now. You know, most of the podcasts that I listen to, that everybody listens to, are all recorded, and I think that's, special. There's always some, I guess, from your perspective, there's always some chance that something's not going to go quite right or anything. Have you ever had any circumstances where it gets challenging doing a live show?
So in the beginning, I just blindly assumed nothing would go wrong. Everybody would show up. It was just going to be all gold. And quickly I realized there's a technology issue that's hanging up somebody from connecting in, or the phone doesn't work, or the internet went down, or you name it. And we've gone through the paces. But what I quickly learned was, if you're going to do the live show, you got to have stuff that's evergreen, that's just sitting in the back. So if you and I were going to be doing an interview and Chicago caught on fire and you couldn't make it, I'm not just sitting there going, well, what am I going to do for the next 18 minutes? It was supposed to be me and Duce talking about competition barbecue or the catering company or both of those things. And now I have 18 minutes. It might not seem like a lot of time, but as a host, Duce, you can certainly attest. Talking for 18 minutes on the fly, very tough to do, no matter how great of a speaker you are, how creative you are. It's very tough to do, especially regularly. Maybe once in a while you can get away with it. So that's why whenever I roll across something that I think is interesting, that has no expiration date on it, I'll stick it in a file. And then I can usually tell now, so many years into it, if somebody's not in my switch box or it's a regular guest and all of a sudden they weren't communicating with me earlier in the day. There's little spidey sense things that happen. And so I'll start to gear up just in case. And if that happens, now I have stuff I can fall back on, or I can read some emails that I didn't get into in the beginning of the show open. So there's filler, but it isn't just filling nonsense. It is show related, or It's a take that I wanted to get to at some point. But I mean, like I said, you name it. I've experienced something where I've had to, dive left real quick to keep the show going.
You're well known, especially people that have been on your show, for being a stickler for the audio situation and making sure the people have the right microphone. Why is that so important to you, and why is it as important as a podcast in general?
It's my opinion, but I think there's so many other options for content nowadays. Why would you allow somebody to make a decision that has nothing to do with the content and the quality? Well, it does have to do with the quality, but if it doesn't have anything to do with the content of the show, if you're bringing great information, you're bringing value, but your sound sucks, strike 2, 3. You're done. I mean,
right.
Maybe one time, but there's been plenty of shows that I don't want to bore you with an anecdote, but my oldest daughter played very competitive volleyball, eventually played in college. And on one of her travel teams, she had a coach. We became friendly. And her friend had this great podcast concept that they got into in the pandemic. And it dealt a lot with mental health of athletes and what real life athletics is like in the collegiate sense. And it was great, and I listened to it, and their sound was shit. But the content was so compelling. I would write them notes, and I was like, can somebody please spend $60 per microphone, and you guys sound like professionals, because I'm literally suffering through your crappy sound because the content is carrying it, but it's not going to be long-term viability here. To the point where I bought them microphones. And then,
I was just thinking that. I was like,
I did. I bought them. I was like, girls, I'm just buying you the stuff, and you're going to sound great. And then they used it one time, and then they fell out of love with it, and it was all over.
Oh, my gosh.
I listened 20 episodes, 25 episodes, because the content was so good. But in this day and age, like in 2024, you can't get away with it. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, you could still ride the fence of having shitty audio as the host. I decided back then I wasn't going to be I never wanted to have shitty audio as a host, number one. But then I also decided that I was going to also demand my level of audio from my guests. Because why have me sound great when it's very easy for you to sound great as well? And you can do it very inexpensively. A lot of bad things happen in the pandemic, but the one thing it taught us is everybody can sound almost broadcast studio quality for very little money. USB microphone into the computer, do a couple microphone tricks, you sound like $1 million, and there's no reason that anybody that's hosting any kind of show or their guests, like you said, most of the shows are not live. Like, I understand that it's a bit of a hurdle for me to ask my guests to do that, but I send them gear in advance. Like, my show's booked up mostly, a month and a half to 2 months out, depending on what time of year it is. And I will say, if you don't want to buy one, I will send you one, but you're not getting on the show otherwise. Your content isn't that great where I'm going to sacrifice you sounding like you're in an echoey bathroom. We don't do that anymore. I stopped doing that 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And the guests,
well, good for you to maintain that quality. And I think it's the right thing.
I wanted to raise not just podcasts, but broadcasting in general. I wanted to raise the sound bar to where even nationally syndicated radio shows would say, if we have recurring guests, we're going to make sure that they're mic'd up, especially if we're using Zoom, because this is what the standard should be, having great quality audio. If there's late breaking news and you got to use the phone, I get it. But everybody knows what the phone sounds like. But you should never have a guest connecting in through a video source like Zoom or whatever we're using here.
Yeah.
And sound like crap, only to have that person show up on his own TV show later in the night and be professionally mic'd up and sound like $1 million. Like, don't you care about the audience? Don't you care about the host that's giving you time? And doesn't the host care to not sound like shit? It's so easy. So I'm trying to put the whole industry on my back and raise the level of audio. I mean,
Good
you
for
care, Duce. You came to me, you said, what do we need to do? How much do I need to spend? Blah, blah. I gave you a bunch of options. You don't need to spend $250, $300 on a USB microphone. It can be $69. That's the one that I recommend to everybody, and it sounds like $1 million. But you cared enough to at least start out the right way. And I think we're finally getting to that point where most people want to sound good, and they want their guests to sound good too.
I remember listening to a Gary V podcast, and he was clearly like on someone's stage, like repurposing the content. Like it wasn't his thing to record it. He was just there speaking, but it was the worst audio. And I am not kidding when I say, I'm like, Greg would be so pissed if he was listening to this. Oh man, that's awesome.
Matters. I think it matters because
it does. I turned it off. I was like, I love listening to Gary V's. It's a great message. I know you listen to what he has to say and stuff like that, but it's not worth, bearing through this horrible audio cracking mic and everything. It's not worth it.
As a host, I'm like, I would rather have somebody get done with an interview and go, oh, I wish it went longer, than to and because we both sound pristine, instead of having one side sound like ass. And they're like, man, this thing won't end. Or, oh, God, thank God it's over. Like, they're tired from having to suffer through listening to bad audio, and it doesn't have to be like that.
Tell me the story. We had a phone call, I don't know, a few months back before I started the podcast, and you told me the story of your first guest on the show. Can you tell everybody that story?
The first guest ever?
Yeah. Famous barbecue guy.
Oh, Stephen Raichlen? Okay, that wasn't the first guest on the show. I thought you were
really?
getting me to give up the ghost here, but
okay. Well,
yeah. So Stephen Raichlen was like the biggest name guest that I got as I was starting to get into the podcast space.
Okay.
And I was thinking, I'm just going to blast this letter off email, and I'll probably never hear from somebody. And if I do, it's going to be a manager or some type of PR hack, and it's going to be all these different requirements on how you could even potentially get them. And within 10 minutes, Stephen Raichlen replies back to me, love to do it. Let me know when. I was like, whoa.
That's
crazy. This just changed my life. I called my brother up. I was like, Stephen Raichlen just emailed me back. Said he'd come on my show. He said, who is Stephen Raichlen?
Yeah, right.
I'm like, it doesn't matter if you don't know. In my world, it's as big as it gets. And, that was 2000 and... That might have been a 2006 interview. It might have been 2007. But he's been regularly appearing on the show for the last 12 years.
That is nuts. Go through real quick your regular guests right now.
Right now, you get a Malcolm Reed first Tuesday of the month. You get a Sam the Cooking Guy first Tuesday of the month. You get a Meathead second Tuesday of the month, along with a Robert Moss, who is a well-known barbecue historian, contributing barbecue editor to Southern Living Magazine. Third Tuesday, you get a Wes Wright from cookoutnews.com, who really has a handle on a lot of the business stuff that's going on in the live fire world right now. And then you get a quarterly guest in the third Tuesday in the second hour. So you either get a Susie Bullock from Hey Grill Hey, you get a Jess Pryles from Hardcore Carnivore, or you get a Daniel Vaughn from Texas Monthly. And then fourth Tuesday of the month in the second hour, you get the Embedded Correspondence, which is myself, and then a panel of now 4 other gentlemen who it's weird. Like, that segment has morphed into mostly 100% assurity questions. So just in case somebody didn't understand that word assurity, I am fully aware that is not an English word. That is a word I've made up. I have a tendency to do that when you talk off the top of your head for 2 hours. For the last 18 years, you make words up. It's just my knack. But assurity is what we call it, the 100% assurity question. So I say 100% yes or 100% no. Sweet Baby Ray's is the best commercially made barbecue sauce. And then we go across the dais and people say yes or no. And in the beginning, it was just answers and we never followed up. And then maybe a year or two ago, I decided I was going to start digging in a little bit more because that could create a little bit more dais controversy. And we all love a little bit of controversy in our lives, especially in the barbecue world. So
social media loves controversy. Yes, for sure.
So that's been a nice development for that particular section. So in the beginning of 2025, we're actually going to make Meathead a quarterly guest, and I'm working on filling the 2 other spots that'll be that second Tuesday. So you fall asleep on my show twice. That's in my book twice too many, and now we got to figure out alternatives. So
come on,
Meathead, but he's going into the corner with a dunce cap.
I was thinking about reaching out to Meathead to come on my show. He's an interesting fellow, as you know.
Totally, he's great.
I met Susie Bullock for the first time out at the Jack over the last weekend. She's very nice. I didn't get too much time with her, but she has a ton of great content online. She's got to be interesting to talk to. She's got a new take compared to a lot of your other guests, I would imagine.
She's prolific in recipe creation. She's worked for a lot of really big companies. And the win of the whole thing is she has transitioned all of that into her own huge company. I think well over 1 million, maybe even more subscribers or followers, whatever you call them, on her Facebook fan page. And she's got her own subscription-based grill squad on her own website and all the other social media channels. And her husband have really turned Hey Grill Hey, which was hers in the beginning, but I think with the help of Todd, who left the CPA job to also take part in that family venture, have really built it up to be quite a significant player in the live fire world these days. And I agree, younger, fresher take, has a lot of great business savvy, but has also taken advantage of a lot of social media opportunities and TV opportunities that come her way to build the brand out. And they're always focusing on brand building and helping. They're really good humans, first and foremost, and they also happen to be really good business people, and they can spot things to hone in on and capitalize on. And I say capitalize in a loving way, not in a greedy way.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Have you had a show since the Jack or no?
If it was this past weekend, then my first show will be tomorrow night.
So it was...
Oh, yeah, I did.
No. Because it was the weekend before. Yeah.
So
was there any hot takes away from the Jack this year? Anything pop out in your head from what people were saying?
My hot take on competition barbecue is it's dead as a doornail. Like, nobody cares. Like, I didn't care about the Jack Daniels. First time in 18 years. I could care less. I could care less about the American Royal that's coming up.
Why do you think that is?
I'm anxious to see if we go back-to-back scoring snafus, but I just don't have an interest in it, and the audience doesn't appear to have any interest in it, and I know that because they don't write me letters going, how come you don't talk of as much competition barbecue anymore? Nobody's asking that question.
Yeah.
Just look at how many competitions there were, look how many there are, look how many get canceled. It's there's a lot of bad things going on in competition barbecue that aren't helping it grow, that's for sure.
And do you have any interest or intel on why that is? Just people are just not into it because the scoring sucks, the system isn't right, or...
I think you can overlook scoring. I think you can overlook judging, not scoring mishaps, but maybe you felt like you should have got a better score than you did, which translates back into judging.
Right, judging.
I think there's bigger issues afoot. I think, for KCBS specifically, they had shed a couple sponsors. I don't know if Rod is really out there pushing to secure new sponsorships. I haven't heard anything new coming in. In any business, whether you're nonprofit or not, you need to have money coming in, and then that money's got to go to the right places. So I don't know specifically what his job duties are, but I would imagine part of that whole play when they got him in there a couple of years ago was they thought he would probably be able to bring in some pretty heavy-hitting sponsors in order to try and keep growing, and they're not growing. I don't know what kind of financial fitness they really have. I would be scared. Yeah. It doesn't seem to be growing the way everybody thought it was going to be growing like 10 years ago. If it went back to just being that regional sanctioning body that it was when it started, it wouldn't shock me in the slightest.
Very interesting. I mean, I went down to the Jack, and I had never been there before, and I don't compete. I haven't competed since 2018, but I got invited from a friend of mine who was going down there with the barbecue bus, and it was very cool to be down there. I saw a lot of people I don't see very often. The experience was cool, but as a whole, I understand what you're saying, where there's less and less about competition. And when we think about like posting content and stuff like that, we're not trying to appeal. We do some competition stuff, but it's mostly for the backyard person or people in restaurant industry and stuff like that.
For as much as competition has fallen off, the backyard has picked up and has shown zero signs of slowing down. And that's really where the show has started to be catered to for the last handful of years. It's more backyard. It's more talk to pit makers and businesses and cookbook authors and all that stuff, because that's what the backyard folks want to hear.
Awesome. I think that's outstanding. Let's talk about some of the newer backyard kind of trends, if you will. What's your take on the flat top grilling? You know, Weber's got a new one. Of course, Blackstone. There's, in your mind, is that barbecue?
It's a good question. I'll say, okay. So this is the host and me going to flip it back around on you. How do you define barbecue?
How do I define barbecue?
We're not working on the same definition, then my answer is going to be different.
Well, my definition of barbecue is pretty much cooking outside with friends and family with a heat source that has some sort of smoke or some sort of flavoring like smoke to it, and then it's kind of what you grew up on, you know, what you took from your parents or your grandma or whatever, and but more than anything, it's being outside with friends and family and some sort of like cooking with fire, I would say.
All right, so in that definition, then flat top cooking is absolutely barbecue. You're outside, you're with family and friends. There is a heat source. Whether you have direct access to that heat, debatable, of course, but it is direct to the cooktop. There can be smoke introduced to that in a number of different ways, depending on how creative you want to be. You can throw wood pellets down there. You can put a top over it, capture that wood smoke like they do when they're smoking their old fashions and Manhattans and whatever else they're doing with those smoke guns. So there's ways to get around that. So in that definition, yes. Do I have one? Yes. It's Blackstone. I've heard really great things about that new one that Weber has released that you were just talking about. And there's a host of other standalone griddles. One of the sponsors of my show, Pits and Spits, just came out with one. It appears to be like a freestanding gas grill, but then they also have a stainless steel flat top that you can put down over the grill grates and turns it into a stainless steel flat top. That's $4,000. So, expensive, yes. Are you going to buy another gas grill or griddle in your life? No. You're going to hand it down to your kids.
Right.
It's all, where's your budget? Where do you perceive value in this industry, and where are you going to spend your money? But it's still very popular. I'm a big fan. I like it.
That's awesome. What's your go-to smoker? Like if you're cooking a brisket or ribs or something like that, what's your go-to?
Go-to?
Mm-hmm.
It's the Green Mountain pellet cooker.
Mm-hmm.
if I have time and I'm allowed to be by the firebox, then it's going to be the offset.
Yeah. That's
It's
what
a
I tell
nuanced
people.
question, Duce. I appreciate the nuanced question because
Yeah.
there is no better barbecue than comes off of a offset smoker if you're running the fire right.
100%.
Sometimes life comes into play, and this is where the pellet cooker really shines. And if we're talking about best things that have happened to backyards over the last decade or so, I mean, pellet cookers have been around since I think the early 80s when Joe Traeger first introduced it, whatever. But really hasn't seen popularity until the last 10 years or so. And everybody's pretty much got one. Could we argue back and forth over how it has made the backyard pitmaster lazy and not have to learn how to build a fire and do fire maintenance? Yes, I think that's important. I mean, to me, that was important when I came up. You had to learn how to do that. Even if you were using a Weber Smoky Mountain, you had to know how to light the fire. You had to know how to work the vents right. You had to know when to kick the ash off the coals. And there was a lot of things that you had to learn how to do. And once you learned it, you had those skills. You could show up. I could show up at your house, cook on anything you got. I can run an offset. I can run pellet cooker. I can run a charcoal-driven cooker. You don't need to know that these days. So the old man in me thinks that's a crime, but the person that also loves technical evolution thinks it's probably really good and has helped the industry grow.
There's a lot you don't need to know with AI nowadays.
Yeah.
I can't agree more with the pellet cooker. It's easy. So Weber has provided one for us that we use in the videos. I brought it to my house over the weekend, and I used it like 3 separate times.
Is it the Searwood?
The Searwood, the new one. It's nice. It's heavy duty. You can smoke on it. You can cook hot on it. I was very impressed, and it's definitely makes life easy for sure. But
they should have waited and brought this one out first. They should have waited another 5 or 6 years. They brought out Smoke Fire as a big steaming pile of piece of shit.
Yeah.
And they caught heck for it. And they should have just waited for the Searwood. I mean, who knew back then, of course, but this was...
Yeah, I don't know. They had a couple weird things. They had that Kamado... What was that thing called?
Well, but that's still available. That's like the big pedal on steroids. So now they call it it was the Weber Summit Charcoal Grill initially.
Yeah.
And they've renamed it the Weber Summit Kamado. But it's the same. Okay. It's the same thing. They just rebranded it.
Yeah.
That was a little weird because they said, "Oh, we're not competing with Kamados," but then they called it a Kamado, so you're competing with Kamado. Who cares about that? The bigger thing was it was a really bad introduction into the pellet world from Weber with the Smoke Fire, but they have fixed it with the Searwood, and I've heard many, many people who I respect highly say that the Searwood is great.
It's good.
I'm glad to see that they got the train back on the track.
Yeah, me too. I also wanted to touch base on the offset. So something I tell people when they're looking at different smokers for industry or for their backyard is like there's plenty of options. Like we use Southern Pride. It's kind of like what you said about the pellet cooker. It's like you set it and forget it. You don't really have to know how to do anything. It's so well made, it does it for you. And then there's things like, barrel cookers. Very, different where you're managing the fire and stuff like that. But it's my opinion that there's no better flavor profile than a traditional offset smoker.
Yeah.
It's just tried and true. It's smoky but clean at the same time. I think very, very, particular flavor profile that I enjoy for sure.
If you're running the fire right, clean, so to me that means live fire there's like a real live burning active fire in the firebox. You can barely see any like white smoke, puffing. You don't want any of that. That nice, every once in a while, a little wisp of blue smoke coming out of the stack, and you can see it. There's a certain, I don't want to nerd out, but there's a certain, like, I call it the smoke velo. So you look at the chimney, and if the smoke is coming out at a certain rate, then I can tell you where that cooker's running at, temperature-wise, when you get the smoke velo. And that comes with knowledge on the cooker. You got to use it.
Is that another made-up word, velo?
Smoke velo? No, smoke velocity is.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just tighten it up a little baseball if I could possibly, exit velo. So smoke velo, and then I think you have those cookers are moving so much more air in volume as compared to a pellet cooker, which is like a pittance. It's got the fan. If it didn't have the fan, that thing wouldn't be moving any air at all. So you have a big offset. It's sucking air into the firebox. It's getting heated, and then it's pushing it through the cook chamber and out the exhaust. And it's just pounding that thing in a good way with flavor that you just can't get anywhere else. I agree. It's the best tasting barbecue when it's done right.
Where do you see barbecue moving over the next? You've been doing this a long time. You do it yourself. You talk to some of arguably the best barbecue aficionados, pitmasters, industry people there is on a weekly basis. What do you have a sense for where we're headed in the next couple years?
In the backyard, I think we'll see a slowdown in the appetite for pizza cookers. I think we'll continue to see technical evolutions on all the major brands. Maybe it's technology we don't even know about. Maybe there have been some AI grills that were kind of teased beginning of the year at some of those tech expos out in Vegas. I haven't really seen them in full-blown use or any large-scale use at this point. So that's something that I could see over the next couple of years, having a bit more AI integration into some of these cookers. I do believe this is a hot take, so gear up, champions. I think we might see a return back to wanting to know your cooker more instead of trying to figure out the easiest way to get out of it. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to spend X amount on this Wagyu cut of beef or this brisket or these heritage breed pork, when I started, there was not nearly the amount of top quality options from a meat, pork, chicken perspective. Now you can spend a shitload of money and you don't want to mess it up. So I think as everybody agrees that these are good options and you want to buy these because the taste is better, the quality is better, start with a better meat, end up with a better end product, I think people want to take control of that back a little bit more and play around with the fire and learn those.
Well, now that they have so much more time on their hand because they do everything through AI, they have time to really do the barbecue right.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And then I continue to see that level of meat quality staying where it's at. I see the appetite for that remaining from the American consumer as well. Having access to prime beef at Costco, and it's at a really good level, is a huge benefit. And then making relationships with online folks that can really get you the top quality stuff like LaFrida or Kevin Green down at the butcher shop in Pensacola. These guys can get their hands on amazing stuff, and maybe you only eat it once in your lifetime, but you never had access to this level of beef ever. And now you can get in touch with these purveyors and have a life-changing experience, even if it's just once.
Yep. I think that's really important that, there's so much more access to both high-quality meats, but also information of how to cook them, online. There's so many people doing great content for free that you can just look up at any time. And I think that's great because it's making everybody's barbecue better, What's next on the docket for you and the BBQ Central Show? Any changes, any updates, anything exciting?
Other than Meathead going to a quarterly guest in 2025, we're gonna stay the course for now. So the regulars will remain the regulars outside of that change that I had mentioned, and then I continue to take the pulse of the audience. I continue to ask for their participation. They're sending me what they think they want to hear. I've thrown a couple things out that I thought maybe wouldn't get picked up from a interest standpoint, and I was wrong on both sides of it. Barbecue guys are interested in watches, and barbecue guys are interested in premium hand-rolled cigars, and more the latter. So I've had cigar owners, like the brand owners, on the show over the last couple of years, and I've had a guy who hosts what is in essence the BBQ Central Show of cigars on my show about once a quarter or so over the last 2 years, and it's been a great sidetrack. Barbecue guys love to dive into it once they get into something, and to be able to dive into a whole different industry and learn that everybody talking about how great Cuban cigars are is actually a load of shit, and you're overpaying for what is a below average product. And oh, by the way, it's probably counterfeit if you actually get it. These are things that I want to know.
So I don't know anything about cigars. What if I wanted to get a nice cigar? I don't care about how much money it is. I mean, I'm not going to spend $1,000, but I don't really have because I'm only going to get one, so it's not a big deal. Well, where would you point me in the right direction?
I don't even know why you would just want to get one, but I mean, if it's just one, then we're going to go Byron Grand Selection, and it's probably going to run you about $65 to $70 for the cigar.
And
but if you
what can you expect with that?
So I think you have, on the strength scale, you're probably looking. So strength to me would be, I'm going to use the word nicotine. This is not going to lead into the slippery slope of where I tell you they're non-addictive and it's not a cigarette and all this other stuff. We'll get into that in a minute. But depending on how you're smoking it, you get like a heart pump, maybe a little bit of a buzz. Like, that's strength. Mm-hmm. So this is probably in the 4 category, maybe. But it is full flavor. So the taste on your palate, are you picking up the chocolates and the coffees and the leathers and stuff, like just the very high level nuance? And it's clean and it burns well. And even if you're smoking it, not rapidly, but I think they say you should puff a cigar every minute or so. This one could last you hour 45, maybe 2 hours if you're smoking it even a little bit at a slower rate. So for the cost, I mean, they're just exceptional cigars. I would never buy one because I'm not spending $60 or $70 on a cigar, but I get gifted them every so often from a friend of mine out in Minnesota. And I think it's his way of thanking me for decades of content. And we have a shared love of cigars. But like a daily smoker, I'm going probably a brand called McAuliffe, which I've recently fallen in love with. They have a color line. So they have a McAuliffe Black, which is a Maduro or a dark wrapper. That one's stronger, probably 5, 6. Again, full flavor. So it might be a little too much for you. Then they have one that has a similar innard but a different wrapper on the outside called the Blue, and then they just came out with a red. That one might be my favorite. The Black was my most favorite, but now the red might be my favorite. That's a whole different wrapper. Completely independent of each other, really good if you like cigars and you don't want to spend a shitload. I think the Robusto is $7 and the Toro is $8. Cigar guys will understand what that means. Yeah. And you buy them by the box and they come in less than that because you get the box discount. So that's the brand I'm hyping up right now is McAuliffe Black, Blue, or Red. You got to try.
Nice. I am interested that barbecue people are interested. And then you said watches too? Barbecue people are into watches?
Yeah.
No shit.
Yes.
Really?
All different kinds. So that, everybody loves to talk about luxury watches, but even all the way down to Citizen or Seiko and, stuff like that, all points in between. So it's been shocking to me to see who's into what, but I've been a long-time watch fan and more on the horology point, like the guts of the watch and how it works. A lot of people don't know that America was one of the most prolific watchmakers in the world. Mid-1800s to mid-1900s, they made millions and millions and millions of pocket watches a year. And then after World War II, the wristwatch comes out that becomes way more efficient and way more feasible to wear on your wrist than carrying this thing around in your pocket. There's a company out in Colorado that sources old pocket watches and then turns them into wristwatches. So you're wearing a piece of American history. So it's
nice.
It's all kinds of fun stuff.
Now, do you get a bunch of, you mentioned the cigar guy sending you a cigar. Do you get a bunch of rubs and sauces and barbecue tools?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Like
all
sent to you all the time?
Grills, tools, rubs, sauces. Yes. I don't remember the last time I paid for any of that.
Can I send you some Duce's Wild product?
Yeah.
All right. This is very good conversation, Greg. I appreciate it. Now, let's talk a little bit about how the internet and social media and podcasting has really changed, I think, over the last 5 years, maybe even the last 3.5 years since the pandemic. Anytime during the pandemic and forward, we'll say. Because it's just been such an influx of more people producing content, I feel, in my opinion. I mean, we started then, right after the pandemic, we kind of went all in and started, really putting attention on and producing content and got us into the podcast and everything else. And I've noticed, a lot of newer barbecue podcasts. What's your opinion on where that barbecue podcast scene is? Do you feel like people are bringing value? How can you, speak your mind about what you think about that?
I'm happy to listen to every barbecue podcast there is out there. I try and listen to all of them. If I think there's some potential and there's a way for me to help them ramp up the learning curve, I've been known to reach out to folks just on my own, say, hey, take it or leave it. Free advice is worth what you pay for it, right? But you might want to try this, you might want to try that, or do this instead, just see if it works. If not, who cares? The bottom line is this. There was me, and then there's this, and then there's still me, and then there'll be other stuff, and then there will still be me. So there's a level of dedication that it takes to have a successful podcast, number one. And then number two, you have to have put yourself in a place to succeed. And that comes from figuring out a concept of a show and then being able to do it repeatedly, not the same show, but being able to repeat a concept for you to come back to every week or every other week or whatever the release schedule is going to be. By the way, that's important too. You decide on a release schedule and then you live and die by the release schedule. Yep. If you go every week, you got to figure out how to make it work every week. If it's going to be once a month, you got to figure out how to do it once a month. You can miss one. If you miss 2 or 3, then the audience can check out. As soon as they realize you're not invested in it, then they divest quickly and will find 10,000 other options to fill their time.
There's so much out there.
So much out there. So I just think you need to want to commit. I always tell everybody, if you're getting into, unless you're a superstar already in some way, celebrity-wise or comedian, every day I'm seeing these people get $50 and $100 million podcast deals. And I'm like, your boy's been out here hustling for almost 20 years. I can't get a sniff, but I know I'll still be here when everybody else is gone because I did it because I wanted to do it and I was passionate about the topic in general and have just found a way to work through all the different segments of the industry. I've made a lot of great friendships over the years, a lot of great contacts over the years. Even if we're not friends, I have contacts all over. For sure. It's just been something where if all the sponsors dry up tomorrow, the show will still go on tomorrow night because I like doing it. I like prepping for it. I like everything about it. And if you're in there for the money, you're going to be done in 6 months. unless you're a star, unless you're coming into it already with some kind of audience. But if you're like most of us, starting out at zero, and the expectation is you're going to be pulling down big fat checks inside of 6 months, I'm here to burst your bubble, Johnny. Like that's probably
That
not
ain't happening. Yeah.
Maybe you're great, right? I mean, prove me wrong, please. But I've been around long enough to realize that if you're doing it for the money first, you're going to fail quick.
Right.
You got to do it because you're passionate about it, and you just really can't worry about what anybody else thinks. I mean, that's kind of a life lesson too, but
Right.
Do it because you want to do it, and do it the way you want to do it.
Right.
You know, I can't tell you how many emails I get every week telling me how bad the show is and how much
How to
I
run
suck.
your show.
Yeah. You're annoying, and you do this and you do that, and I'm like, okay, I'll be back Tuesday, and so will you. So
Yeah.
those are like that's what I don't even know if I answered the question, but I think I'm happy that there are other barbecue podcast options, and I listen to a lot of them, and I'm fans of some of them. So
That's really cool.
and if anybody ever had any questions for me, even if you're not in the barbecue space, like I know a lot about podcasting in general, then please, reach out. I want to help.
Yeah, I'm excited to do our podcast because the thing I get most out of it is the relationship building. I get to, hook up with you. If it wasn't for the podcast, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Yep. I got to talk to Malcolm and Darren, and then I get to go a little bit outside of the barbecue world and talk to some more marketing people like Matt Plapp and Sean Walchef and stuff like that. And I really enjoy keeping those relationships. I had a new relationship with somebody that I haven't seen since we were kids, and he's the executive chef of Blue Plate, and we did a collab together. I had him on the podcast, and now we're doing another bigger event down at Blue Plate next week. And that's what I'm excited about, is to keep evolving and growing as not just a barbecue guy, but an entrepreneur in our business and stuff like that. So it's really been, and I have to stop saying stuff like that. Every time I say it, it drives me crazy because I listen to it on the podcast and I keep on saying it. It's driving me crazy.
You want to know how to fix it?
Yes. How do you fix that?
Do you spend a lot of time in the car?
Not too much time, but I spend a lot of time at the gym, so that could be something. I don't know.
Well, you're going to have to decide you want to do it or not in the gym. But as a sales guy, I do see my fair share of windshield time. Whenever I'm in the car, I'm talking just to myself, talking out loud, talking like I would be on the show, but I'm just commenting on the car next to me, or I'm talking about the weather, or talking
in your
about
show
anything.
voice.
Yeah, like my normal show cadence, just like this. I'm doing this, but I'm doing it in the car, and I'm talking about the green Taurus that's ahead of me, and as we're going 75 miles an hour, and constantly thinking about the words that I'm using, and then I'll get to a point where I can't think of the next word, and the old me would go, do the word filler words or whatever, because you feel uncomfortable not saying anything in that moment of silence. Instead of waiting, it's silent. That's okay. We'll find that word and then we'll keep going. The normal habit is to and stuff like that, whatever the filler, the crutch, the fallback is. So what I have found is, like everything, you want to get better at it, practice. You want to get better talking, talk a lot, talk out loud. But you can't talk in your head. You got to talk out loud, and you got to talk like you're doing it on the show. And then you have to find peace with silence. Because 1 second sounds like 1 minute, but it's really 1 second. And also, the pause will draw the audience in. If you're going, and then there's a nice 1 or 2 second pause, the audience is like, ooh. They're leaning in.
I've noticed that listening to podcasts where it's like, like you listen more intently after that pause. That's interesting that you brought that up.
The pause is giving
I
you,
for sure noticed that.
As a listener, the pause is giving you time to process what the host has actually been saying. You don't want to be talking for 4 or 5 minutes at a clip, and it's just info. Stop every so often. Take a pause. Let the audience realize what you've been saying, let them take it in and process that, and then pick it back up and start rolling again. But well-placed pause there's nothing better than a well-placed pause.
What's the best barbecue restaurant in Cleveland?
There's a place in Parma called BBQ Smokehouse. Danny Casano runs it, close personal friend of mine. He does not fuck around. He's the only guy in Cleveland that operates like he's in Texas. Opens at lunch. If he sells out, fuck you, show up earlier tomorrow. I'm closed. He doesn't run it like everybody else. It stays open till 8 or 9 at night because they feel like they have to in order to make things work. He's open Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. That's it. Brisket's phenomenal. Chicken's phenomenal. Pulled pork is great. He does baby back ribs. I'm not a fan of those. Baby back ribs. The ribs are actually really good. And he does this great grown-up mac and cheese, which is phenomenal. And his collard greens will blow your head off. They're so good. I'm not a collard green guy necessarily, but his are some of the best. Everybody I take there, they love the meats, of course. This isn't one of the things where the sides outshine the meat. That's a problem if you own a barbecue restaurant, by the way. They're great, though. On their own, they're good. So they're really good.
What's your relation?
Come into Cleveland, we're going to BBQ Smokehouse.
That sounds amazing. What's your relationship with Chef Michael Symon?
Aside from being besties?
Yeah, that's it. You guys are best buds.
Like I can pick up this phone for everybody that's listening. I'm holding up a phone. Like I can text him and he'll text back. That's shocking to me, to say the least. I had chased him for years, and I think it was on a Twitter one time. I just happened to tweet out to him, and then he direct messaged me. And that's kind of how we started. So that's going on maybe 5 or 6 years at this point. He had me out to his restaurant on East 4th Street. I interviewed him live in person in the restaurant to put on a podcast, and then we've stayed in touch ever since. And he's very busy. It's not like we're texting 10 times a day like me and the cooking guy do. But for his level of who he is, even if I text him every 3 months, I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? Boom, hits you right back. I was like,
That's
wow,
awesome.
like he is on it. So I'm just honored that that he even gave me a cell phone. So he gave me I was like, dude, you just gave me your cell phone, right? People don't do
Keep
that.
it clean. That's all you gotta do.
Right.
That's awesome. I love listening to your interviews with him, and then I just love the content that he puts out online. I like his style of cooking.
So good. I mean, what you see, that's him. There's no put on. There's no gimmick. He's exactly that guy. I've sound checked him. The last time I had him on, we had it ended up being 35 or 40-minute sound check, just talking about nonsense. We were like best buddies. So it just goes to speak to what kind of person he is. And I mean, this is what Clevelanders are. We get a bad rap, but we're really good people and we like good food.
You answered all my questions, brother.
That's what I'm here for.
Tell everybody where they can listen to the BBQ Central Show.
If you want to listen to it live, you show up Tuesday nights from 9 to 11 p.m. Eastern on the show YouTube page, which is at BBQ Central Show, or the show Facebook page, which is /BBQ Central Show, or on the Twitter, which is /BBQ Central Show, or if you want to get it on audio podcast, which is the way I recommend everybody listen to it. No reason to look at me. Use theater of the mind and let audio capture you that way. Available on all the podcast platforms. Just search the BBQ Central Show, and you have 1,600 episodes to come back through after the most recent release.
Greg, you're a true professional. I aspire to be more like you on my podcast, and I really appreciate you taking the time tonight. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Duce. I appreciate it.